Kola sat at the dining table in the vast, silent dining room, looking at the plate of food before him, barely touched. Across the long table sat Toyin, his new wife. Her face was a mask of indifference as she stared at her phone, oblivious to his presence. Kola felt a deep pit of regret growing in his chest. This wasn't how he had imagined marriage. Surrounded by wealth, he felt lonelier than he ever had in his life. Kola was born and raised in the small, peaceful village of Eni. Growing up, he had always felt secure, surrounded by the love of his family. His father, Adisa, worked tirelessly on their small farm, growing yams and cassava. His mother, Yemisi, sewed clothes and sold them at the village market. Life was simple but filled with love and laughter. Every evening, the family would gather around the fire, sharing stories and dreams of the future. Despite their humble life, Adisa and Yemisi carried big dreams for their son. Adisa wanted more for Kola than the life he had, a life without the relentless grind of the farm and the sting of poverty. "One day, you'll bring us pride, Kola," his father would often say. "You'll marry well, and you'll make a name for our family." Kola respected his father's dreams, though he couldn't fully understand them. He was happy as he was. Love, respect, and a warm home were enough for him. But his parents saw things differently. They wanted security, respect, and a future beyond what they could provide. Then, one sunny afternoon, an unexpected guest arrived. A wealthy man from a neighboring village, Mr. Ajayi, and his family had come to visit. Kola's parents welcomed them with wide smiles, eager to hear the purpose of their visit. Mr. Ajayi spoke confidently, presenting a surprising proposal. His daughter, Toyin, was looking for a husband, and they believed Kola was a perfect match. Kola's heart raced. He had heard stories of Mr. Ajayi's wealth, his large house, his lands, his numerous servants. It felt surreal that such a man would come to them, offering a marriage proposal for his daughter. His parents were thrilled, their eyes sparkling with dreams of a life free from hardship. "Kola," his father said that night, gripping his son's shoulder. "This is an opportunity. Marry Toyin, and you'll be rich. You'll lift us out of poverty, bring us respect." His mother chimed in, her voice soft yet insistent. "Kola, think of the respect this will bring our family. You'll be giving us a future." Kola looked at them, seeing the hope in their eyes, the yearning for a better life. Though he had reservations, he felt trapped. How could he deny his parents their dreams? How could he say no to a proposal that promised so much? Reluctantly, he agreed, hoping that perhaps love would come later, that maybe, just maybe, he could learn to be happy. The wedding day came, and it was an event unlike any the village had seen before. Guests arrived from far and wide, dressed in elaborate attire, whispering about the wealthy bride and the new life that awaited Kola. The air was thick with excitement, the sound of music filling the village square, as people feasted, danced, and congratulated the couple. Kola stood at the altar, feeling like a stranger at his own wedding. He glanced at Toyin, his bride, who looked stunning in her gold-adorned dress, her face delicate and calm. But her eyes were empty, distant, as though she were somewhere else. She barely looked at him, her movements robotic, rehearsed. Kola tried to shake off his unease, telling himself that it was just nerves. As they exchanged vows, Kola stole glances at Toyin, hoping to catch a spark of warmth, a hint of happiness. But her face remained expressionless, her words mechanical. When he reached for her hand, it was cold, limp in his grasp. After the ceremony, they were whisked away to the grand mansion that was to be their new home. The house was everything he'd heard about, huge and extravagant, with tall pillars, rich furniture, and servants who moved silently through the halls. Each room was furnished with the finest materials, every corner adorned with decorations that spoke of wealth and power. Yet, the mansion felt cold, lifeless, devoid of the warmth he was used to back in the village. In the weeks that followed, Kola began to realize just how vast the distance was between him and Toyin. She spent most of her time in her private quarters or out with friends, rarely speaking to him. When they did interact, Her words were polite but detached, as if he were just another servant in the household. The more he tried to connect, the more isolated he felt. Kola's new life fell into a routine, a lonely, unfulfilling cycle. Each morning, he would rise to find Toyin already gone, leaving him to wander the mansion's empty rooms. He would try to engage the servants in conversation, but they would only nod and smile politely, keeping their distance. He felt like a ghost, drifting through the corridors of a house that wasn't his, surrounded by wealth that brought him no comfort. Mealtimes became especially painful. Each evening, they would sit at the long dining table, eating in silence. Kola would try to start a conversation, asking about her day or sharing something about his own. But Toyin would barely respond, offering only a nod or a one-word answer. Her eyes remained fixed on her plate or her phone, and Kola felt the loneliness grow. He tried to convince himself that things would change, that perhaps she just needed time to warm up to him. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, it became clear that Toyin had no interest in building a life with him. She was content to live in her world, keeping him at arm's length, treating him like a stranger. Social gatherings became an ordeal. They would attend events with other wealthy families, mingling with people who admired Kola's good fortune. He was praised for marrying into such a prestigious family, his hand shaken by men who congratulated him on his luck. Each compliment felt like a stab, a reminder of the life he was supposed to be grateful for, yet despised. Toyin played her part flawlessly, smiling and laughing with their guests, acting the role of the perfect wife. But as soon as they returned home, the mask would drop, and her cold indifference would return. Kola felt trapped in a charade, forced to play the role of a happy husband, while his heart grew heavier with each passing day. One night, as he lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, Kola felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He had sacrificed everything he knew, his family's warmth, his village, his freedom, all for a life of wealth that felt like a prison. He realized, with a sinking heart, that he was lonelier now than he had ever been before. Desperate for an escape from his empty life, Kola began to spend more time outside the mansion, running errands in town, visiting the markets, trying to find some semblance of the life he had left behind. It was during one of these trips that he saw a familiar face. Io, a childhood friend from his village, was at a fruit stall, chatting with the vendor. Kola felt a rush of joy and relief as he approached her. "Io," he called, waving. She turned, her face lighting up with a smile. "Kola, I hardly recognized you," she laughed, pulling him into a warm hug. They stood there, catching up on lost time, their conversation flowing easily, filled with laughter and old memories. For the first time in months, Kola felt a genuine sense of happiness. They began meeting regularly, finding solace in each other's company. Io's warmth and kindness were a balm to his wounded heart, reminding him of the joy he had once known. She listened to him, offering comfort and understanding without judgment. Kola found himself opening up to her in ways he couldn't with anyone else. "Sometimes, riches feel heavier than poverty," he confided in her one evening, his voice low. Io listened, her expression sympathetic. "Kola, wealth can buy many things, but it can't fill an empty heart. You have to decide what truly matters to you." Her words struck a chord, planting a seed of doubt that grew each day. Kola began to question the life he had chosen, wondering if perhaps he had been chasing the wrong dream. Io showed him that happiness didn't come from wealth or status, but from love, kindness, and understanding, the very things he had given up. Unable to bear the loneliness any longer, Kola decided to confront his parents. He returned to his village one afternoon, seeking answers, desperate for understanding. When he entered his family's modest home, he saw the pride in their eyes, the happiness they felt because of his marriage. But as he poured out his heart to them, telling them of his emptiness, his regret, his longing for a life that felt real, he saw their faces change. His father's expression grew stern, his mother's troubled. "You have everything now, Kola," his father said, his voice firm. "People respect us because of you. You should be grateful." "But Baba, I'm not happy," Kola replied, his voice breaking. I feel like I'm living someone else's life. It's not mine. His mother's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. You have duties, Kola, she whispered. We dreamed of this for you, for all of us. You're a man now. Men don't complain about blessings. Kola felt a surge of frustration and sadness. They couldn't understand his pain, couldn't see the heavy price he had paid for their dreams. He left the village feeling more lost than ever, carrying a sense of betrayal that deepened his loneliness. That evening, after returning home, Kola found himself unable to contain his emotions. He confronted Toyin, his voice shaking with anger and desperation. Why did you marry me if you wanted nothing to do with me? He demanded, his voice echoing in the empty hall. Toyin looked at him, surprised by his outburst. For the first time, her cold facade cracked, and he saw something vulnerable in her eyes. Do you think I wanted this? She replied softly. My family pushed me into this marriage just as much as yours did. Kola stood there, stunned. He hadn't considered that she, too, might feel trapped. They wanted a perfect life for me, she continued. They told me you'd be a good husband, that I'd be respected. But I never wanted this. I never wanted you. In that moment, they saw each other not as husband and wife, but as two people bound by choices they hadn't made. A new understanding grew between them, a fragile connection born out of shared pain. They weren't enemies but victims of others' expectations, each one sacrificing their happiness for a future that was never truly theirs. Kola knew he couldn't continue in this empty life. He had to choose his own happiness, even if it meant disappointing his family, even if it meant leaving everything behind. With a heavy heart, he packed his belongings, leaving a note for Toyin, wishing her peace and freedom. Returning to his village, Kola felt a profound sense of relief. The weight of the mansion, the silence, the loneliness, all of it melted away as he walked through the fields, feeling the earth beneath his feet, smelling the familiar scent of home. Io welcomed him back, her embrace warm, her smile genuine. Together, they built a life of simplicity, of laughter and love, of shared dreams and mutual respect. It was a life filled with small joys, harvest celebrations, evenings spent under the stars, moments of quiet contentment. Kola had found his true wealth, not in gold or grand houses, but in the people who made life worth living. His family, over time, came to understand his choice, accepting that his happiness was more valuable than any material riches. In the years that followed, Kola's story became a legend in the village, a reminder that true wealth lay not in riches but in the freedom to choose one's path. It was a lesson he passed down to the younger generation, a legacy of love, respect, and the courage to live authentically. Kola had found peace, and with it, he had discovered the true meaning of wealth, a life filled with love, lived on one's own terms, surrounded by those who truly mattered.